What could be a problem from time to time are parallel hard reflective surfaces close to each other in the field of a sound source, because that's going to cause flutter echo. That's bad. But there's nothing wrong with parallel surfaces if you deal with them. Okay? In fact, most mastering rooms are truly rectangular. In fact, almost every mastering room is a rectangle, interestingly enough, not splayed. But having said that, we see a lot of splayed plans, and you will see a lot of them when we look at the floor plans, but we'll explain why we see them. It has nothing to do with the fact that parallel walls are bad. It has to do with nipping off a first early reflection from an opposite speaker from a wall. In this case, the last thing we really wanted was a hardwood floor. Here's the wood, and a parallel surface 14 feet away. You could get a flutter echo, and that just could be dangerous. The concept of the room was to have it very reverberant. This also was very ahead of its time for small studios. Okay, this mainly came from Eddie. Eddie's, and any of you who know Eddie's work, you know, and know how he records, he'll put a drum in the middle of the biggest room he can get, and put that room mic on, and that's what has given him some of those characteristic sounds that he's made, Led Zeppelin drums, et cetera, et cetera. So that was his idea of a room, comes from, because he was working at Olympic Studios all before this. So the idea was to get the volume of this room as high as possible, and to get the reverb time, remember that Sabine with the reverb time, as bright as possible, but not have problematic reflections. Now, at the age of 22, I was not thinking in terms of this, I assure you. I don't want to mislead you. I had no idea. Well, I shouldn't say I had no idea. I was just kind of fumbling around. Big room. I knew what the reverb time equation was. I had researched that. That wasn't that hard to figure out. But, a lot of this was seat of the pants. Now, I have the benefit of history behind me to look back and understand why the room works. I also can understand why certain rooms didn't work. It's a nice thing about looking back sometimes. So, the characteristic 60s mural, Jimmy as a friend of his painted these. Apparently he was a famous artist, and they're still there, actually. Early days, a lot of cool activity there. Lena Horne. There's that curve that was left over from the club. Now this is a concave curve, very dangerous in a studio to have a concave shape. Inward curving shape, very dangerous. So how do we get away with it? We're covering it with carpet and insulation. So it's absorptive. That's how we're getting away with it. Why did we do it? Because Jimmy wanted it, and that's the whole point. The whole point is that it didn't have to be a rigid, boring space that followed either economic guidelines or even anybody's agenda as far as acoustical guidelines. It could be a space that had charm and it had character and it had soul, to use a, to use a word that clearly was a word of that era, and that's what he wanted. And they said, okay, we'll work the acoustics out later. We'll figure it out later, or let's get the soul, let's get the spirit of the space right, because that's what it's about. And this was a big moment and a big changing moment. Now, every studio is like this. It's a requirement that it has soul. In fact, if your studio doesn't have some kind of soul and some kind of charm and some kind of vision, why even have it? What's the point? That is my position. So just some old shots, and a younger Jimmy Page and a younger Robert Plant. Because Robert stayed thin and Jimmy didn't stay thin, I guess. Both thin then. So it was fun, and artists hung out there, sometimes slept there, et cetera, et cetera. So some nice shots. And one of the apparently only 3 shots of Jimmy in the studio. Very, very hard. Nobody's ever been able to find very many of them. This is one of them. And I love looking at this every time I look at it, because he just looks so peaceful, and it's in black and white. So almost 40 years later, now actually 41 years later, because I made this a while ago, the control room has changed. We know a lot more about control rooms. First of all, the equipment's changed. Okay, the speakers have changed. The musical requirements have not really changed. This is still a studio where people want to work loud. Okay, this is a rock and roll album studio. This is not a post-production studio, not a film mixing studio. This is a music studio. Okay, and so the room got deeper. All that big piece of glass, that got pushed out. We know a lot more about first reflections from speakers off of big consoles. We know a lot more about room shaping, and we have different equipment characteristics. So, but you can still see that's the current manager, and all of you recognize Acoustic from the Cars, et cetera. So it still is a vibrant space, and I think part of it is its name, and part of it is the charm. But the room, that's it about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and that's it 40 years ago. Same room. They took the mural out of the lobby and put it into the studio. So it is fun to see some of the core infrastructure work remaining, and it's actually kind of nice and exciting to see a studio survive. The life of studios is not that big, actually. Most studios don't live that long. But this is a transient moment, and it's not this studio. It's more a bunch of studios like that. We're just using this one as an example because I got my hands on the pictures and the drawings, and it's also a fun little story. But it's a changing time, okay? So this is a wonderful story, okay? It makes us all smile, et cetera, et cetera. But it's most likely not where things are going, okay? The part of what happened here, which is in fact what's happening and what I believe will stick and is gonna stick here for a long time, is that the artist has taken control and that the studio world has gotten more democratic, coupled with the fact that we've gotten really much smarter. I mean, we know a lot more than we did 40 years ago, and that's this slide. The professional audio world has, and it's going to continue to become democratic, because democracy, even in the political sense, everybody I'm sure will agree with me, is non-entropic by nature. Once democracy hits, it's very hard to go back if communication is open, and communication, of course, is completely free-flowing. Once it hits, it's not going to go backwards. You're not going to see downloading disappear. You're not going to see 6 record companies take over again. It's just not going to happen. Okay, you may see different movements and different kinds of optimization of distribution systems and whatnot, but artists taking control is here to stay. So, but what does that mean as far as studios are concerned? Well, let's take another little look at our music industry. These few slides were borrowed from Chris Stone. Chris Stone created, along with Gary Kellgren, arguably one of the most famous studios called The Record Plant. He did it on 2 coasts, retired now and is an advisor and consultant to the music industry. And he presented a talk about 2 years ago at the AS, and I stole some of these slides, not all of them, because some of them were really cute. You can read them quicker than I can talk about them. I don't want to read them. But this is how things used to work. 6 major labels, they controlled everything. Okay, you can read it as fast as I can describe it. And that's how things used to be, but that, of course, is not how things are now. Okay, what's going on now? And I kind of summarized it by just outlining in red what's really going on. The audio, the artist has taken control. Basically, every artist has their own recording studio. I mean, literally, not every artist does. But every artist either has their own studio or they can go get their own studio at any moment. They are not controlled. They're not being told where to work. You can work anywhere at any time. You don't even have to have the artists in the same room anymore. It's completely free-form in nature. It's completely flowing. It's completely democratic. And then all the rest of the data flows with it. Now, how did this happen? It didn't happen overnight, but it happened really quick. It happened basically in the last 15 years. But the seeds, the seminal work for it, happened in basically around 1970, when artists started basically building their own studios, and then that entered the heyday of people building lots and lots of recording studios. So when that kind of phenomenon happens, the equipment people rise to the occasion, and the acoustic people rise to the occasion. That's us, that's me. Everybody got smarter, better equipment, better acoustics, better measuring equipment. When you can measure something, you usually get better at it. If you can't measure it, you usually don't want to deal with it. Okay, now we have very sophisticated acoustic measuring equipment for $800. That's basically a toaster. That's basically shelf stuff. That's disposable. It's cheaper than a laptop. So when everybody can make measurements, then you can't cheat anymore. There's no more voodoo. The room's either working or it's not working. Okay, et cetera, et cetera. So standards just kept getting higher and higher and higher. Okay, so more facts, and you can read all this. The brick and mortar is dying. The digital downloads, look at some of these numbers. I actually think these numbers are conservative. This was a 2-year-old estimate, and I think they're actually bigger.